My wife wrote, "He's losing it all." She toasted with champagne, celebrating our divorce before the process had even begun. Her book club applauded, her trainer boyfriend grinned, and her lawyer reassured her that millions were guaranteed. But none of them realized that for the last 2 years, I'd been playing chess while they were stuck on checkers. By the time Dolores figured out the game had shifted, the board was already mine. My name is Vin Harmon. I'm 61 years old, and I've been married to Dolores for 32 years. We live in Medford, Oregon, where I spent the bulk of my career in Forest Service consulting before moving into private land management. Dolly was always the social star, PDA president, book club leader, the kind of woman who always knew everyone's secrets and loved broadcasting her opinions. The day my world changed began like any other Tuesday. I sat in my home office going over timber assessment reports when a Facebook notification buzzed on my phone. Quincy, our 24-year-old son, had tagged me in a comment. That's when I saw it. A picture of Dolly, champagne flute in hand, oversized sunglasses from our last Cabo trip covering her face, smiling like she had hit the jackpot. The caption read, "Finally free. Divorce papers filed today. He's the one losing everything, not me. Time to start living. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag freedom." It already had 43 likes, 11 laughing emojis, and comments streaming in from her book club friends. "You go, girl. About time. And he never deserved you." I set my phone down slowly, as if moving too fast might cause it to explode. A bitter metallic taste filled my mouth. It wasn't exactly shock. It was the confirmation of suspicions I'd carried but hoped were wrong. For months, I'd overheard whispers when she thought I was asleep, seen her wardrobe shift, noticed the way her speech patterns changed, like she was rehearsing for a role in someone else's life. What she didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment longer than she had. While Dolly posted her freedom journey online, I was meeting quietly with Vernon Thatcher, an old Army brother who had swapped fatigues for a law degree. While she bought champagne glasses for her staged photos, I was restructuring assets and creating trusts. She always underestimated me, saw me as the silent handyman who paid bills and kept things in order. But what she failed to see was that the same careful mindset that made me successful in forestry also made me skilled at strategy. And believe me, I had a strategy. I picked up the phone and called Vernon. He answered by the second ring. "MV, I saw it," he said immediately. "She really went public with this one. Like fireworks on the 4th of July, I replied. "Think she's ready for what comes next?" Vernon laughed, dry and humorless. "She doesn't have the faintest idea what's coming." It had all started 18 months earlier, on a rainy November night. I had dozed off in my recliner watching the Blazers game, back aching from a day of timber surveying near Crater Lake. The house was quiet except for rain tapping on the windows and the occasional crack from the fireplace. That's when I heard Dolly's voice from the kitchen, hushed but sharp. "Trust me, Wanda, he has no clue what's coming." "Funny thing about hypothetical scenarios, MV," Vernon said. "They have a way of turning real, fast." His office was inside a converted Victorian on Main Street, the kind of building that whispered wealth and quiet authority. No neon, no ads, just a polished brass plate reading Thatcher and Associates, estate planning. The waiting room smelled of leather and quiet confidence. "Coffee?" Vernon asked, gesturing toward a polished silver service on an antique sideboard. Even after all these years, he still carried himself like a ranger, back straight, sharp-eyed, never wasting movement. "Black," I said, lowering myself into a chair that probably cost more than a mortgage payment. He poured us both cups and handed me one. "So, MV, tell me about this so-called hypothetical." I laid it all out, every detail from that night, every strange conversation I had overheard since, every subtle shift in Dolly's behavior. Vernon didn't interrupt, only made occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. "Timeline?" he asked when I was done. "She mentioned after our anniversary. That's 8 months away." Vernon nodded slowly. "Time's on our side, then. Now assets?" I pulled out a prepared folder. The house, worth about $450,000. A riverside cabin on the Mackenzie, $280K, give or take. My consulting firm, hard to pin down, but bringing in steady 6 figures. Retirement accounts, around $800,000. And then the timberland near Mount Hood. "How much land?" he asked, eyebrows lifting. 47 acres. My grandfather picked it up dirt cheap back in '43. Timber alone is worth nearly $500,000. But the development potential, I shrugged. Sky's the limit. I laid it all out. Every detail from that night. Every strange conversation I had overheard since. Every subtle shift in Dolly's behavior. Vernon didn't interrupt, only made occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. Timeline, he asked when I was done. She mentioned after our anniversary. That's 8 months away. Vernon nodded slowly. Time's on our side then. Now assets. I pulled out a prepared folder. The house, worth about $450,000. A riverside cabin on the Mackenzie, $280K, give or take. My consulting firm, hard to pin down, but bringing in steady 6 figures. Retirement accounts, around $800,000. And then the timberland near Mount Hood. How much land? He asked, eyebrows lifting. 47 acres. My grandfather picked it up dirt cheap back in '43. Timber alone is worth nearly $500,000. But the development potential, I shrugged. Sky's the limit. Vernon put down his cup. MV, what I'm about to suggest is entirely legal, but it will demand precision and patience. Can you handle that? I've been patient for 32 years. I can manage 8 more months. For the next 2 hours, Vernon mapped out a strategy both ruthless and elegant. An irrevocable trust funded by my consulting business. Timberland transferred into a conservation LLC with me serving as unpaid advisor. The cabin placed into a qualified personal residence trust for Quincy. What about the overseas accounts? I asked. Vern's pen paused. Accounts? From my contracting work in Kuwait back in '03. Kept some reserves in Swiss banks. Nothing shady. Fully reported to the IRS. How much? About $200,000. Dolly has no clue. For the first time that day, Vernon cracked a smile. She's about to learn just how much she doesn't know. As I walked back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't in months. Control. Dolly thought she was the one playing chess while I stumbled with checkers. She had no idea I'd been studying the board for decades. The next 8 months became a masterclass in strategic patience. While Dolly choreographed her grand escape, I quietly dismantled every piece of the financial picture she believed she understood. Every Tuesday, Vern and I met for lunch at a small diner on the edge of town. To anyone else, we were just 2 veterans catching up over coffee and pie. In truth, we were orchestrating the most comprehensive asset protection maneuver I had ever seen. The timberland was the first move. We created the Pacific Northwest Conservation Trust, with myself listed as unpaid environmental advisor. The 47 acres were donated with full ecological documentation. An environmental impact study I'd paid $15,000 for, locking in the land's conservation value. Perfect, Vernon said, reviewing the paperwork. Even if she fights it, the state board will defend the designation. The cabin followed 2 weeks later. Quincy balked when I explained. Dad, I don't want to be part of a scheme, he said over dinner in Eugene. This isn't a scheme, son, I told him. This is protecting 3 generations' work from someone who only sees it as liquidation cash. The trust allowed me use of the cabin for 15 years, but ownership shifted to him immediately. What if Mom contests this? She can try, I said. But the trust predates any divorce filing by 18 months. Vernon made sure. The business was trickier. We restructured into Cascade Resource Management LLC, with Vern's firm holding the agreements. Technically, I was just an employee. The Swiss accounts were simplest, funds from my overseas days, all legitimate. What Dolly never realized was that I'd been transferring consulting fees into crypto portfolios managed through those same Swiss banks. Bitcoin's volatile, Vernon warned at one of our Tuesday lunches. So is divorce court, I replied. At least with crypto, I held the keys. By the time Dolly filed those papers, what she believed was $1 million marital estate had been whittled down to little more than the balance in our checking account and her car. Everything else had been shifted into legal frameworks that made Fort Knox look like a child's piggy bank. The brilliance wasn't just in the protection, it was in the timing. Every transfer, every trust, every restructuring had been executed months before she ever breathed the word divorce. Vernon ensured that even the most determined attorney would see nothing but airtight preparation. 3 days before our anniversary, Quincy texted me. Dad, she's asking questions about the cabin. Wants to know if you've given me anything lately. I replied, Tell her the truth. You're the legal owner of a conservation cabin with a 15-year use clause. Sometimes, truth itself is the most devastating weapon. The Riverside Cafe was Medford's hotspot for the social elite. Overpriced salads, pretentious wines, and enough gossip to fuel the town for months. It was the exact place I expected to see Dolly reveling in her supposed triumph. I hadn't planned on being there. I was on a hardware store run when I spotted her silver Lexus. Something made me park across the street and slip into the coffee shop next door, where the windows gave me a clear view of the cafe's patio. And there she was, commanding a table with 4 women from her book club. Lacey Winters, married to the biggest car dealer in town. Janet Collins, the mayor's wife. Rebecca Stone, from a family that had been in Oregon timber since territorial days. And Dolly, my soon-to-be ex, in a coral blazer I'd never seen, waving a champagne flute like a maestro conducting her own orchestra. I ordered black coffee and sat by the glass, phone in hand, pretending to scroll while eavesdropping through the open window. The lawyer says I should expect at least 60%, Dolly was saying, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Maybe 70, given how long we've been married and his earnings. Lacey leaned forward. What about the cabin? That place must be worth a fortune. Oh, that's mine too. Community property. Same with the timberland and his little consulting company. Rebecca lifted her glass. Here's to finally getting what you deserve. They all clinked and laughed like giddy teenagers sharing secrets. The irony was suffocating. Dolly believed she'd won before the game even began. And Brock? Janet asked slyly. How's that going? Dolly's grin widened. Let's just say I'm rediscovering what I've been missing. A real man who knows how to value what he has. Good for you, Lacey chimed in. Mvin never seemed like he had much fire. That jab cut deeper than I wanted to admit. 32 years of marriage, and now I was reduced to little more than a worn-out piece of furniture in her conversations. I drained my coffee and headed back to my truck. On the way home, I called Vernon. They're certain, I said. Talking about 60 to 70% splits. Vernon chuckled. Confidence is a lovely thing, MV. Right up until reality smacks you in the face. When do we show them reality? Soon, he replied. Very soon. 3 days after Dolly's divorce petition hit the courthouse, her phone rang while she was reorganizing her wardrobe. She was sorting clothes into 3 piles. Keep for her new life, donate, and burn for the ones tied to our marriage. Quincy later told me he'd stopped by, still playing the dutiful son though he knew what was coming. Franklin Accounting. Dolly answered, setting the call to speaker as she folded sweaters. Mrs. Harmon, this is Patricia Franklin. We need to go over some issues with your financial disclosures. Dolly barely looked up. What kind of issues? Well, several accounts you listed. We can't access them. That got her attention. What do you mean you can't access them? The timberland, for example. County records show it was transferred into a conservation trust 14 months ago. You're not a beneficiary. Dolly dropped the sweater. That's impossible. That land's been in Vin's family forever. It's still in the family technically, but under the Pacific Northwest Conservation Trust. Your husband is listed as an unpaid environmental advisor. He no longer owns it. What about the cabin? A pause. That's trickier. Legal ownership passed to your son Quincy through a qualified personal residence trust. Your husband retains usage for 15 years, but what? But you have no legal claim to it. Dolly collapsed onto the bed. Quincy later said her face had gone white as paper. And the consulting business? She asked quietly. Restructured as an LLC. Your husband is listed as an employee, not an owner. The agreements are legally complex. What does that mean for my settlement? Another long silence. Mrs. Harmon, based on what we can verify, you're looking at about $40,000 plus your car. The quiet stretched until Patricia had to ask if Dolly was still there. 40,000? She whispered. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harmon. I know this isn't what you were expecting. Please, sit down with your lawyer to review your options. When the call ended, Quincy said Dolly just stared at her neatly sorted piles of clothes. The woman who dreamed of champagne now faced a reality closer to boxed wine. At 7:30 that Thursday evening, a knock rattled my door. I just cracked a beer and turned on the evening news. Through the peephole, I saw a tall, lean man with graying hair and a weathered face that told of hard living. Mr. Harmon, he said when I opened the door, my name is Clifford Barnes. I think we need to talk. Something about the way he stood, the set of his shoulders, stirred recognition, not of him exactly, but of something familiar in his features. Maybe the jawline. Maybe the eyes. What can I do for you, Mr. Barnes? I asked. He pulled out a manila envelope. I got your address from one of those Ancestry DNA services. Turns out, we're related. My blood ran cold. 6 months earlier, I'd submitted a DNA kit Quincy had convinced me to try. I hadn't expected it to uncover family secrets buried deep. Related how? I asked. Clifford's smile was grim. According to the DNA results, you're my father. I froze, then looked at him more closely. Now that he'd said it, the resemblance was obvious. The nose, the stance, the way he leaned slightly forward as if always braced for impact. Come inside, I said at last. This isn't something we talk about on the porch. In my living room, Clifford explained. His mother was Rebecca Martinez, a woman I'd dated briefly in 1985 before I ever met Dolly. We broke up when I was reassigned to a logging project in Alaska for 8 months. What I never knew was that Rebecca had been pregnant. She passed 3 years ago, Clifford said quietly. Cancer. Before she died, she told me who my father was, but made me promise not to disturb your life. Why tell me now? I asked. Clifford pulled out his phone and showed me Dolly's Facebook post. Saw this. Figured if you're going through a divorce, maybe you'd want to know you've got family you can lean on. We ended up talking for 2 hours. He worked construction in Portland, had 2 kids of his own, and came across as a decent man. Practical, straightforward, allergic to drama. I recognized more than my features in him. He carried my temperament too. I'm not here for money, he said before leaving. I've got my own business, my own responsibilities. But if you ever need anything, I'll be there. After he left, I sat in my recliner staring at the DNA paperwork he'd handed me. Dolly didn't know. Wouldn't know unless I told her. But the timing was uncanny. Just when she thought she had my life figured out, the universe reminded me that family has a way of showing up in unexpected forms, sometimes exactly when you need it. At 2 a.m. on a Saturday, the shrill ring of Dolly's phone jolted me awake. She'd been sleeping in the guest room for 2 weeks, so I had to hear it buzzing endlessly until she picked up. Wanda. Dolly's voice was groggy. What's going on? Even from down the hall, I could hear the panic in Wanda's voice, though the words were muffled. Whatever she said made Dolly sit bolt upright. Slow down. Which hospital? Okay, I'll be right there. She scrambled to dress in the dark and slipped out without a word. Lying awake, I considered it. Wanda Pratt, Dolly's younger sister, had been battling addictions and mental illness for over 20 years. If she was hospitalized, it meant one of 2 things, another overdose or another suicide attempt. The next morning, I called Quincy. Your Aunt Wanda's back in the hospital. Your mother drove to Portland last night. What happened this time, he asked. Not sure. But the timing? Interesting, don't you think? He was silent for a moment. You think it's tied to the divorce? Your mother's been leaning on Wanda, telling her everything. If Wanda said too much to the wrong people, or cracked under the pressure, I didn't have to finish. Quincy knew. With Wanda, stress always meant volatility. And volatile people spill things they shouldn't. 3 days later, Dolly came home looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Eyes swollen, hair unkempt, her movements heavy with exhaustion. How's she doing? I asked, feigning concern. Detox. Again, Dolly muttered. But she said some things while she was high. About us. About the divorce. I waited. She might have called your lawyer. Said things she shouldn't have. That was interesting. Wanda had always been reckless with secrets. If she had phoned Vernon's office rambling, every word would be recorded. And if those words contradicted Dolly's official statements, well, that was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. The Jackson County Courthouse felt like an arena the morning of mediation. Dolly strode in wearing a sharp black suit that probably cost a month's rent, flanked by her attorney, Leland Moss, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I arrived with Vernon and a single manila folder. The mediator, Judge Patricia Stone, was a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over enough divorces to be immune to theatrics. She opened by listing Dolly's demands: 60% of assets, alimony, and sole ownership of what she called the family properties. Mr. Moss, Judge Stone said, present your client's inventory. Moss fumbled awkwardly with his paperwork. Your Honor, we've encountered complications in the valuation. If I may, Vernon interjected smoothly, sliding a thick binder across the table. Judge Stone opened it, scanning the first pages. Her brows arched higher with each line. Mr. Moss, she said slowly, were you aware that the timber property your client claims was placed into a conservation trust 14 months prior to any divorce filings? Dolly's face drained of color. That's impossible. That land has been in Vin's family forever. It's still in the family, Vernon said evenly. Just not yours. Ownership passed to your son through a qualified trust. Judge Stone continued reading. And this consulting business, restructured into an LLC with complex agreements. Mr. Harmon is technically listed as an employee. She flipped another page. And the Mackenzie River cabin. Leland tried to protest, but Vernon's calm smile cut him off. That property, too, was transferred to their son. Mr. Harmon keeps usage rights, but Mrs. Harmon has no legal entitlement. The silence that followed was crushing. I watched as Dolly's air of confidence collapsed, replaced by the dawning realization that everything she thought she'd win, everything she'd flaunted to her friends, had been secured beyond her grasp months before she even filed. But Vernon wasn't done. Your Honor, one final issue. We have evidence that Mrs. Harmon's sister, Wanda Pratt, contacted our office while under the influence. In her statements, she revealed that Mrs. Harmon had been planning this divorce for over 2 years and had intentionally staged conflicts to fabricate abuse that never occurred. He played the recording. Wanda's slurred voice confirmed every word. Judge Stone fixed Dolly with a look of withering disdain. Mrs. Harmon, do you have anything to say for yourself? Dolly stared at the table as though it might swallow her whole. Based on the evidence, Judge Stone continued, the transfers in question were made legally and prior to divorce filings. Mrs. Harmon's settlement will be limited to her personal vehicle and any accounts in her sole name. As we left the courthouse, Vernon clapped my shoulder. Feels good to be a free man, doesn't it, MV? Feels like justice, I said, glancing back at Dolly and her attorney quarreling in the parking lot. Feels like finally playing chess instead of checkers. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood on the deck of my cabin. Legally Quincy's cabin now, but still my home, watching the Mackenzie River roll by as it had for 100 years. The crisp autumn air smelled of pine and renewal. Clifford had driven down from Portland with his kids to spend the weekend. Slowly, we were building a bond, discovering that family isn't made by blood alone, but by honesty, trust, and showing up. Dad, Clifford said, joining me with a mug of coffee. Still feels strange saying that. Still feels strange hearing it, I admitted. But it's good. His teenage son Tyler was down by the river teaching his little sister to skip stones, while Quincy joined in, slipping into the role of older cousin with ease. What happened to Dolly? Clifford asked. Last I heard, she moved into a rental in town. Brock disappeared a couple weeks after the settlement became public. Funny how fast romance fades when the money dries up. Meanwhile, the crypto portfolio I'd built in my Swiss accounts had nearly doubled since the divorce, making my decision to convert assets look prescient rather than paranoid. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was standing here, surrounded by family, old and newly found, without the shadow of someone who'd once seen us all as items on a balance sheet. Grandpa MV, Tyler shouted from the bank. Come show us how to build a proper fire. I smiled, remembering my own grandfather teaching me the same thing on this same riverbank 60 years earlier. Some traditions are worth keeping safe, worth shielding from people who see heritage as just another thing to carve up and sell. Earlier that week, Vernon had called with updates. Wanda was back in rehab, this time court-ordered after her hospital confessions triggered an investigation. Her attorney, Leland Moss, had learned some painful lessons about diligence. And me? I was learning that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something stronger from the ruins. As the sun dipped behind the Cascades, flooding the sky with orange and gold, I realized this was victory. Not a courtroom triumph or financial score, but family gathered around a fire, laughter drifting into the night, and the peace of knowing that what truly mattered had endured. Dolly had believed she was destroying me. Instead, she'd freed me, to finally live. That night, under a sky filled with stars, 3 generations sat together, sharing stories and laughter. And I understood, some battles are worth fighting. not for what you hope to win, but for what you refuse to lose.